This is the Zac Anesbury Show.
Welcome. On today's podcast clip, we have Professor Colin Campbell from the University of San Diego, California, United States. So you've had I think quite a stellar career moving between very prestigious sort of universities and getting to associate professor. No doubt professors on the cards relatively soon. But you've also had what I think is an incredibly impressive role through the journal system. So you're most famous, I guess, from how you sort of introduced yourself at the beginning of the podcast, which is the editor-in-chief of Journal of Advertising Research, quite fondly known as JAR or JAR around people. But your association there is quite long, like over a decade, from starting to review and publishing within that journal. I guess some of us would be thinking, how did your relationship start with JAR?
With JAR, I think it was when one of my early publications was actually in JAR. And usually once you publish in a journal, you're then part of the database. And I think I probably just started reviewing. And my suspicion is to be honest, I did not realize that you could decline invites to review. I mean, I knew you could decline them, but I didn't think you were meant to. So I always just said yes. And I do this for most journals, unless there's something terribly weird happening in my life, I will just say yes, because you just have to kind of do it, right? And so I guess I ended up reviewing a lot for them, and then I won a best reviewer award, I think 2017 or 18 or something, I don't know. And then they were looking for somebody an AE to help with some of the more industry focused papers that they had. And then based on the work I'd done with them, that's when they approached me for that. And then apparently after John Ford did a great job for 8 years. It was a super long time as an editor. I'm very appreciative of his efforts for that. But they were looking for somebody to follow him up, and I got a random email that I was in the running for that. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So it was a total surprise. I did not know looking or even, that I was in the running for that. But I think it just really comes back to, going through, and I've done I think 60 or something, 70 reviews for JAR for the longest time. So they can get a sense of the quality of your reviews and your consistency with that. I've also published in the journal as well too, right? So they know the kind of style of work that you do as well. And I think both of those things just kind of help, right? I think it's just, going through and doing good quality work, whether it's reviewing or publishing, and just being consistent. And it takes a while, but people seem to notice after a while. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Okay. So step one for a young academic might be try to publish in the journals that you're trying to be an expert in, and then getting sort of a bit of a foothold in the reviewing system, because you would kind of be flagged on their databases. This is John Smith and he's an expert on this type of area. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
You can always say that you're down to review as well too. Sometimes it just will happen. The journals will just do it. I can tell you right now, we have to actively turn you on as an ad hoc reviewer, add you in as that. Mm-hmm. And we're open. Anybody can. Who's a qualified. You've got some sort of experience in academia or industry as well too. If you're interested in reviewing, we're happy to definitely try it. Try you out as a reviewer. So please email if you're interested. And what we also do, and I started doing this last summer, is you can pull all of the statistics down of the reviewers. And so that's what I've done. I did it this last summer and then last year as well too. So I think it was July this year, and then July I guess it would be the early beginning of September last year, pulled down all the data and then looked at who are people who are ad hoc reviewers that are doing good quality reviews for us and are doing at least a couple a year. Right. And then let's promote them to the ERB. Let's move them up. Right. Because I think that's sort of the progression kind of goes ad hoc to ERB and then potentially to AE at some point as well too. Right.
Yeah. Okay. And so when you're first reviewing for JAR and, dear Dr. Anesbury, we have a manuscript entitled blah, 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 and I accept it. Yeah. You have a turnaround time of, is it 4 weeks roughly?
Yeah, some journals have 4 weeks. We have 21 days. We shortened it up a bit.
Yeah. And so I am a good reviewer and I submit my review in the 21-day period, and I've given detailed, thoughtful feedback. How do you keep tabs on reviewers that are doing a good job versus potentially reviewers who are not doing a good job? What's sort of the process behind your journal there?
Yeah. So the more formal kind of process is like all of the reviews go back to the associate editor. And the associate editor, like it's not apparent to the reviewers or the authors, but there's actually an internal rating system. So kind of like Uber, right? Where the AEs can rate the quality of the reviews. And those numeric scores then go through and they get basically collated against like each person's name. Right. And so like I'm gonna have some score in the system, like you would have the score in the system as well too if you're reviewing. Right. And that's basically what we can pull and take a look at and see like what that person's scores are like.
Yeah.
The more sort of like qualitative approaches of like every single paper that comes back with a decision, like I look at the stuff, right? So the AEs are saying it, and then it also comes through me, right? So like I can see the quality of like the reviews that are being returned and the decisions as well too. The decisions are also tracked too. So if like somebody is like constantly rejecting everything or constantly accepting everything, or they're recommending that, I guess that's also tracked too. Like, are they, what is their distribution of like outcomes that they're recommending?
Oh, that's very interesting. So I kind of suspected there would be this person does timely reviews and this person does good quality
Yeah,
reviews.
that's also tracked too.
Didn't realize that you were tracking whether someone was consistently accept or reject or something like that. Oh,
It's in the system too, because there's some people who lean one way or the other, which we all have different opinions. That's great, right? But it's sometimes it's useful to kind of know what that baseline is, right? So
yeah. And it's funny that you said that, like, when you first started reviewing, you were like, any email that come your way saying, can you review this? You're like, yeah, no, I owe it back to my academic community to sort of do it. Like, I'm in the same boat as you. And, I've just found myself so poor of time recently, being a number of different journals, that I've just focused to the ones that I'm now on the editorial review board for. And others who send me, unless they're like specifically in my research role and it's going to be a very good paper, I just can't. I just don't have the time. At first,
it can be tough, right?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So it can be tough for sure, but I mean, I would definitely encourage, like, I'm sure you've already done this, is to like think about ways you can be more efficient as a reviewer too.
Yeah.
So like, I would definitely like, and I learned this from like some colleagues as well, as like, I'd suggest like keep some of your different reviews that you have. Like, as I know, like I got this advice of like some people have like templates for different types of comments that they'll give, because they're often like you could have comments around like the theoretical justification is not strong enough, right? And you might copy paste that paragraph and adapt it to the review you're doing, just like you would for students, right? Or the same thing for like perhaps this idea needs to be more interesting, right? And you might have some suggestions around things like that. You can kind of copy paste that in, right, and adapt it as well too. And like I think that's one trick to make it like a bit quicker to kind of go through. I also like to think about papers when I'm reviewing, because I review a lot as well, like you, right? Like I'll think about them in terms of triage, right? So like there's some papers that are just awesome, right? And it's just like those ones are like a dream because like they're rare, right? But like there's not much you have to actually suggest. And then there's some that are in the middle where like there's a lot of work that needs to get done. Those ones probably take the most amount of time because I have to go through and give like a ton of feedback because they're close but they're not quite there. If they're the ones that are just not going to happen for whatever reason, I used to go through and basically give all the feedback on the paper. And what I found is that with those particular papers, it's too much, right? So what I'll do is I'll focus on like, these are the top 3 concerns, right? I've got, and then like describe those because it just makes it faster to kind of go through this. And to be honest, I think sometimes like authors in that boat, I think it's actually kinder, right? Like rather than like, here's 50 things wrong with the paper, like here's 3 things to think about that could make a really big difference to improving the quality of your paper. And I think it's more manageable for them. And it's also more manageable for us as well too, as reviewers. Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose like that helps them in the bigger picture of, this paper's been rejected at a journal. And so now I'm going to go away and try to fix some of the reviewers' comments.
Yeah.
And if I've got 2 or 3 big picture things that I can fix, then the smaller things that would have been picked up anyway are going to get picked up during a minor or major revision elsewhere. Yeah. Okay.
That's
I like
exactly
that.
right.
That's really good efficient
There's
way.
also like, and I've started doing this as well too, there's a lot of like good methods papers out there now. Is like I can point people toward that, right? Or it's not our job as a reviewer to like go through a research design course on like, something where, but you can point them to different articles or different resources, textbooks, whatever, to help like, perhaps you want to take a look at doing this kind of a design. Go look at like whatever that might be. But like we don't have to go through it in detail, right? But we can point them and help them that way too.
Yeah. That's unbelievably good advice. So you've moved, let's just move from reviewers who are ad hocs and now move to editorial review board. They've done a good job, timely reviews, great quality, and have thought through whether, accept, minor, major, reject type of situation. And congratulations, they're now promoted to an associate editor. What are the key metrics for an associate editor? This is where my knowledge kind of falls down a little bit here.
Yeah, that one's a bit like it's probably a more niche role, but I think you could think of it just like an associate editor is kind of like a grand reviewer, because they're looking across the 2 or 3 or 4 reviews to come back, and they're kind of orchestrating across those of there's sense checking, maybe they know that somebody has work in that area and they're being critical potentially because it's a conflict for them or something, right? Or maybe they know that somebody's being too kind and that review isn't good quality, so they send it to someone else, right? They're looking across that to see what's reasonable, what's not reasonable to do, what themes are kind of coming through, right? They might step in a bigger way if, perhaps a reviewer drops out or something. If you're in R&Rs, that happens as well. But they're really kind of looking to synthesize across the different reviews, and then also kind of identify what they think are the key things to kind of move the paper forward, right? What's interesting as well too is that reviewers often think of themselves as being critical, which is important, right? But part of it's also being constructive. And I think a good AE should be more constructive perhaps than critical, assuming a paper is of good enough quality. If there's potential for the paper, they should be trying to help the authors improve the paper and make it as strong as it could be.
Yeah. Oh, kind of, yeah. So they're synthesizing a lot of information across, different people with potentially different agendas. And so knowing academics and so knowing the landscape seems to be pretty important there. Who's publishing in what their point of view might be, whether they have ideas that are conflicting or not. Yeah, okay. I can see that. Is there any...
No, it's interesting. Yeah.
So they're sort of, I guess, subjective kind of things that, in some sense, the reviewers AE is doing. Is there any objective measures that JAR or other journals sort of track to do with, is for example, similar? Do you monitor how many papers an AE recommends for accepting? How many?
Oh, yeah.
How many they're
for sure.
If they're pushing everything out to review, but they should be desk rejecting themselves half of the papers, or time or anything like that. Are there sort of metrics you track there?
Yeah, probably the biggest one at JAR is going to be time, because I've been really pushing to get I want our turnaround time to be a month or less.
Yeah. Just
because I feel it's as an author, I find that to be really helpful. I find it very frustrating if a paper goes off and disappears for 4 months, especially when I'm if it's on a topical issue, right? So I want to get that down. And we've been pretty good. I think our average was 23 or something last year, 23 days, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
I think that might include ones that are desk rejected, which would bring it down. So I still have to check that number, but it's definitely getting quicker, which is good. So part of it's how fast can a AE get in and get it out to reviewers, and then how fast can they go through and synthesize those reviews and also bring them together. Part of it's also going to be managing the review team, because if reviewers don't respond or if reviewers drop out, you then have to maybe ask for an emergency review or ask for other reviewers, or even nudge reviewers too. Sometimes it's hey, how are you doing? You're a couple days late. Are you still doing this? If so, can you please submit it, right? Just to kind of keep the process moving, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's good to know that these things are sort of tracked.
And then obviously I see when the summaries come in, right? So that's part of it too. Of a good AE will go through and they will, if there's conflict among the reviewers, they will A, address it, and B, provide some sort of direction as to how to deal with that. Because there's nothing more frustrating than authors, than an author when you either get too many different ideas and it's which ones do I prioritize? Or the worst thing is you get conflicting ones and you're they say not to do A and they say to do A. What do you do? And so, an AE should be stepping in and providing that. These are the key things. Focus on this reviewer, maybe less so on that one, whatever the case might be, but to give that kind of overall direction of what to do. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you found that that some of the key issues at the moment is potentially seeking reviewers? So say you need 2 or 3 people to give a review to then make a judgment on it. Are you needing to recruit 4, 5, 6 people to get those 3 reviewers? And is this a trend that's across all journals, or?
It seems to me that it's been tough lately getting reviewers. I do agree. I hear that from other editors as well too. And that's something that I'm definitely aware of. And this is as part of that was one of the key metrics that I went through and looked at in July when I sort of went through all of the reviewers in our system, was looking at do they say they're going to review and not review, which is terrible, right? Yes. I mean, it happens for different reasons, right? But please don't do that. Or just not responding to reviews as well too. right? Both of those are really bad because they just hold up the process. It's like, if you know you can't review, things happen for sure. Please tell us like ASAP, right? If you're unable, if something happens terrible in your life, that's those things happen as well too. But again, please like let us know, because like the system sends multiple reminders, and like any of those emails you can respond and say, I'm so sorry, like something happened or whatever, but just please let us know as soon as possible, because like ultimately it's the authors, and like I think a lot of them as well are junior scholars who are waiting for this for their careers, right? So I don't want them waiting 2 months and wondering what's happening. I want to get it back to them as soon as possible. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. There's nothing worse than inviting someone and they accept, and then you're kind of where are they? But yeah, so communication
So
really is key then.
yeah, I mean, it's also just like we have to just have good people on the team, right? So like we've gone through and we've like expanded the ERB, we've expanded the ad hoc base dramatically as well. And like I said, I've also gone through and identified people who are either not responding and they seem too busy. That's fine, but like we're not going to include them in the reviewer set because it just holds up the process. And people who are on the borderline, we actually emailed some and we're just like, hey, like, you seem really busy, are you still able to do this? If you are, that's fantastic. If not, that's fine too. But we just want to know, like, are you in or out, right? So
yeah, and yeah, exactly right. Because life gets busy. People might have had some health issues themselves or in the family, or started children or
yeah,
something.
no, things happen for sure, right? So
yeah, that communication thing, because I do see it as, I mean, it is usually an act of service in some sense towards the journal and giving back to the community that you're, because you expect good quality reviews in a timely manner yourself. So I think it's your role then to provide that to other people. So it's kind of a respect thing, but also like it's a bit of a, I think it's an honorary thing to be associated with journals actually.
yeah, it's kind of cool. I mean, I think that people often like look at reviewing as like work, I think in some ways, and see it as like a negative. But I think the reality is it can actually be quite helpful. And like I do probably between 50 to 80 papers a year I review, right?
Wow.
Outside of the journal,
Wow.
right? Just because of the fact that I'm on like a bunch of ERBs and stuff, right? But like I think it's interesting because like you get to see what are the new issues people are looking at, right? I've I first learned about prolific through a paper I was reviewing. I learned about, like OpenAI and ChatGPT through a paper I was reviewing, like all these kind of like new tools and stuff, and like the visual stuff for AI as well. Like you see new methods, you kind of see like how people are approaching stuff, the ways they're using process or other techniques, and you're like, this is interesting. It's also kind of cool seeing different writing styles. I find very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the most valuable thing for me is like it's a good sense check, right? Because like the part that I love the most, and JR does this as well, and most journals do, is that I send in my review, and then when the AE and the editor make the decisions, right, then we get a copy of the other reviews plus the decision. And so like I can see, like, was I the crazy one? Like, was I too harsh? Were two other smart people on the AE different than me? Or did I miss stuff that the other reviewers caught that I didn't, or vice versa, right? And it's kind of a good way to kind of calibrate. And I think a lot of people, especially younger ones, think they're too busy to review. But I'm like, actually, you learn a lot from doing that. And then the benefit now as a writer is that like I can be writing a paper and I can be imagining what the critiques are going to be, right? Like, and especially with like younger people, there was one paper I was working on with a PhD student, and like he was like, oh no, like because I had come back with a whole list of feedback. I'm like, this is what reviewers will care about. And we literally got the first set of reviews in because he wanted to get it out quick, and I was like, okay. And like it literally was like the same stuff. And he was like, I'm like, you just learn from doing so many papers and seeing it, right? You're like, they're going to talk about that, they're going to talk about this, like you just sense it, right? So, and it just makes it faster for you writing because you then can anticipate it, either do something to bring it up in the paper, or at least it's going to happen, right? So you can prepare for it and expect it, right? So
yeah, so you can read your work or the work of your peers and provide that reviewer insight. And I guess ultimately, yeah, like you said, it increases your chance of getting published yourself.
It does, yeah. It's also because there's some really interesting papers out there, but there's also some papers that are very not so interesting, right? And I guess like seeing those and reviewing them, you're like, okay, perhaps it wasn't like let's try and do better work ourselves, right? We can kind of push ourselves, right? So.
And it's funny you should mention the you see those emerging trends through reviewing articles and stuff. But
it's
sometimes,
true. Yeah.
Sometimes you see the butt end of trends as well. Like every now and again, they've slowly started disappearing. But I'll get like a COVID-19 paper, and it's like, the journal world has moved on, and so has the industry, right? And you see the data sets from like, March 2020 or something like that, and it's like, oh, you've obviously tried for a few years, and I really feel for you, but like our audience is not going to be interested in this paper. I'm sorry. Yeah, and that breaks. I actually find rejecting papers or recommending to the editor rejecting papers a little bit disheartening sometimes, especially if I feel like they have genuinely tried for this paper. And so I do try to frame things quite positively, and this is how you can increase your probability of getting accepted somewhere else. Yeah,
no, it's very true. I think that's important. But I think the biggest thing for me is like, is the topic interesting? Yeah. I think that if that's the number one thing. Like, if the topic's interesting, assuming the methods are done correctly and that people are reasonable in how they're going through doing the research, I think that having an interesting topic is such a huge leg up, right? I mean, an interesting topic without any good methods is not a good fit either. But if you have done a competent job with methods and you convince the review team that you could action their feedback, which is good, right? And you have an interesting topic, people usually will work with you. Like, you're going to get the attention of like editors. It'll be interesting to the AE. Like, they'll give you a bit more rope, right? You might get an extra round of review. They might lean toward major revision as opposed to reject, just because it's intriguing, right? So I think this having a cool topic, looking through it's like interesting is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey guys, it's Zac Anesbury here with just a couple of quick reminders. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, then make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. There are plenty more interviews to come with some of the world's leading marketing academics and practitioners. You do not want to miss these. In the meantime, if you're looking for another way to connect, then follow me on Twitter at Zac Anesbury. That is ZACANESBURY for my take on the marketing issues of the day.
That was the Zac Anesbury Show.